Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. I am Rachel from Rachel Reads, and today I'm going to be doing my September wrap up. So, this month I had a pretty good reading month compared to the last few months. Recently I've only been reading 7 to 8 books. This month I read 12 books. So I'm just going to quickly go through some stats with you, which I'm going to pop up on the screen up here. And then I'm going to go through my reviews. So, without further ado. So, I've just got my little book here. My little KKK diary. Like, I love this little leather bound book. It is beautiful. Anyway, so this month I read 12 books. I read a total of 4,489 pages with an average book length of 374 pages. So this month I read 1 1-star book, 0 2-star books. I read 5 3-star books, 4 4-star books, and 2 5-star books. So not a bad month. Not a bad month really. This month I read 1 historical fiction. I read 7 mystery thrillers. I read 2 contemporary novels. I read 1 new adult romance, and I read 1 horror, although I wouldn't really count it a horror, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So, the first book that I read this month was, I don't have them in order, and I just knocked all over my books. Okay, but the first book that I read this month was An Unwanted Guest by Shari Lapena, and this is my first Shari Lapena book, and I did quite enjoy it. I gave this one 3 out of 5 stars. So if you have not read this book, it is about a group of people that do not know each other that go away for a weekend, and they go to this hotel that's in the middle of nowhere, and they get snowed in. On the first morning that they are there, one of the guests is found dead. Now, at first they think that she has just fallen down the stairs, but it becomes clear that something more mysterious has happened. Unfortunately, they are not able to contact the police because all of the electricity is out, and the storm gets progressively worse. And as the story develops, more people start to die. And it's about who is actually the killer. Is there somebody outside the house, or is somebody in the house, in the hotel, actually killing people, and what is their motive? If I was to rate this on purely the last 150 pages or so, I would probably give it a 5-star. Unfortunately for me, the first 200 pages just dragged. They were so slow. I did almost DNF this book, but because I've heard such good things about Shari Lapena, I decided to persevere. The other issue I had with this book is it's told from so many different perspectives that you don't really get to know any of the characters. It took me a while to actually be able to tell the different characters apart and to remember who was who. And that first 100 pages is just introducing the guests and learning who they are and learning their relationships to one another. And I didn't like that because all of the characters in here are quite two-dimensional. You don't really get to know anything about them apart from, you know, who they are, what they do. So I found that really quite boring. But the last 150 pages or so, I was on the edge of my seat. I was really trying to figure out who the murderer was and how they had managed to remain hidden for so long. Overall, I will continue to read some more of Shari Lapena's novels to see if I like her writing. As I said, 3 stars, not a hit, not a miss, just sort of in the middle for me. The next book that I read this in September was The Perfect Friend by Barbara Copperwaith, and I didn't actually realize when I picked this up, but this was actually originally published as an ebook, and then Amazon, I think it's Amazon, has decided to publish a printed version as well. You can kind of tell as you read that, you know, it is independently published and self-published because of some of the language is a bit choppy, but I didn't mind it. I gave this one 4 stars, and it really is the true definition of a psychological thriller. I really didn't know much what to expect when I went into this book, and after about page 70, I really started to enjoy it. First 70 pages, I was like, what is going on? So this is the story of Alex, who is a self-proclaimed liar. Her husband left her, her 2 children don't speak to her, and all she has left in the world essentially is her best friend Carrie. And as I said, the first 70 pages I had no idea what was going on except for the heading, so I knew it had to be something about the relationship between Carrie and Alex. The synopsis of this book is very vague. It just says, "My name is Alex and my world has been shattered. My husband has left me, my children won't speak to me, my friend Carrie is the only person I have. She's the only one I can trust to keep all my secrets. She'd never do anything to let me down, would she?" So very vague. So I really had no idea where this book was heading. Essentially, you've got two unreliable narrators telling the story. And I think you can figure that out pretty quickly from this book. Like, I don't want to spoil it by telling you that there's unreliable narrators, but you can figure it out pretty quickly, so I don't think it's really a spoiler. And I can't really tell you anything else without spoiling the plot, except don't really trust the narrators. This was my first Barbara Copperweight novel, and I really enjoyed it, and I probably will read some more. So yeah, overall 4 stars. Not a bad read. Also quite a short read too. The next book that I read in September was by one of my favourite authors, and that is Between Sisters by Kristen Hanna. I really don't know the correct way of saying that. And I gave this 5 stars. However, when I was going back to preparing for this wrap up, I couldn't actually remember anything about the book until I went back and read the blurb, and then I'm like, oh yeah, I remember. Like, this book actually made me cry. But the fact that I didn't remember is kind of worrisome. I think it's just the heading that kind of threw me off. Anyway, so this is about 2 sisters who have been estranged for decades, but they come back together because of the younger sister Claire's wedding. Claire's older sister Megan has made some terrible mistakes in her life, which have left her alone without a family. As Claire's wedding approaches, Claire and Megan begin to repair their relationship. A lot more happens in this story, but I'm not going to go into it because it will spoil it for you. But essentially, I would say the first half to 2/3 of this book is classic chick lit. It's about, you know, finding love, reconnection, that sort of thing. The second half of this book, the third, I don't know how you break it up, was a contemporary novel, and it literally had me bawling my eyes out. Like, my heart broke. Just like every other Kristen Hanna book that I have read, I think I've cried in all of her books. So this story is really heartwarming. It's heartwarming, heartbreaking, it's bittersweet. And as I said, it initially presents as a love story, but it's so much more than that. We really see these 2 main characters, Claire and Megan, who are so different and both so damaged in their own ways, really come back together and grow up together, and they grow as people. Much of the story was a little bit far-fetched, to be honest, and a little bit over the top, as is with most chick lits. For example, it was a 1-week engagement. So they met, they have an engagement for a week, and then they get married. But you know what? That didn't really dampen my enjoyment of this book. I was quite surprised by how it unwound. I did not expect the second half of the book, but I'm so glad it was included because it just made this book so much better. And it's what I really enjoyed about this book. This was so much more than chick lit, and I'm really grateful for that. So thank you, Kristen Hanna, for writing such a beautiful story. The next one that I read was Baby Teeth by Zoe Stage, and I'm thinking that's how you say her name. I think it's Swedish, so I'm not 100% sure. I gave this 3 stars. At times I was tempted to give it 2 stars, but I did settle on 3. So this book is about, sorry if I keep looking down, I'm just looking at my notes. I really need to be better at this. So I would say I would settle on about 2.5 to 3 stars for this book. And what it's about is there's a child, 7-year-old Hannah. She's the daughter of Suzette and Alex, and she's an incredibly intelligent child, but she's dangerous. There's no other way to say it, she's dangerous. Pretty sure she's a psychopath. Or do they say sociopath? I can't remember if they say psychopath or sociopath, but there's something wrong with this child. Her behavior is careful and calculated, and that of a much older person. Like, she's very sophisticated in her thinking. She's daddy's little girl. In daddy's eyes, she can do no wrong, but she is vicious towards her mother. And she believes that her mother needs to be punished. So when Hannah is alone with Suzette, the games start to begin, and Hannah, because you actually hear from Hannah's perspective, she actually says she's playing games with her mother and trying to test her and trying to test her love. And it's fucking weird. Sorry for the swearing. As I said, this book was weird. I love the concept of it, but it was weird. all of the characters annoyed the hell out of me. Like, they just all annoyed me. For example, Suzette, the mother, she drove me crazy. She was self-obsessed. She was self-involved. She didn't think about anybody herself. So Suzette suffers from Crohn's disease. If you don't know what Crohn's disease is, go Google it. It's like an internal bowel related disease. And you hear so much about it, but it has nothing to do with the story. Except for like maybe two pages of relevance. But all you hear about is her Crohn's and how much suffering she's been through and how she has these scars and the surgery. And I did not want to read a book on Crohn's. If I did, I would go and buy a book on Crohn's. Just putting that out there. I understand why the Crohn's was included. It showed why Suzette was so fearful of hospitals and testing and those sorts of things, which helped to explain her strange relationship with Hannah. Like, yeah, I get that. But it just went on for so long. Like, no. Just no. How many times do I have to listen to you talking about your diarrhea? Like, no. And Suzette was also so obsessed with her husband and how her husband viewed her. She didn't have any other friends. She didn't have any life outside of the home. She just had her husband and her daughter. And really, she put her husband in front of her daughter all the time. Alex, the husband, where do I even begin with talking about him? He's in denial for the whole book. Okay, I don't want to go into too much more details than that because I'll get into spoilers. But he 100% enables Hannah's activities and behavior. And his actions contribute to Hannah actually hurting her mother and her thinking that there's some sort of competition between Hannah and Suzette for Alex's love. Like, it's just weird. And Hannah, like, I really struggled with the character of Hannah because she really does make you think about that idea of nature versus nurture. Like, was she born this way, or has her parents have her parents' choices in the way that their upbringing made her this way? I'm not sure. But I really struggled to believe this story, and I think that's why I didn't enjoy it. I also found it really repetitive. I found myself just skipping multiple pages because I got bored. Again, great idea, just I don't know if it was very well executed. That is Baby Teeth by Zoe Sage. Next one that I read was The Night Olivia Fell by Christina McDonald, and I would give this 4.5 stars. I think I rounded it down to 4 stars in my rating, but 4.5 stars. Like, this was really good. I devoured this book. And it's about, so in the small hours of the morning, Abby Knight is awoken to a phone call that is every parent's worst nightmare. Her only child, her only daughter, Olivia, has fallen off a bridge and she's sustained serious brain damage and she will never wake up. Only the story gets worse because Olivia's body is covered in bruises, and it turns out that she is several weeks pregnant, and the police aren't taking it seriously. They're just dismissing all of Abby's fears that something has happened. They think that she has just fallen or that she's jumped, and they won't investigate, you know, these bruises and Abby's fear that someone has pushed Olivia off the bridge. So Abby then takes it upon herself to investigate what happened to her daughter, and she is really forceful about finding out what happened to Olivia. And this book didn't really read like a traditional mystery thriller. I would say it felt more like a contemporary novel with that mystery element included. It was really about that struggle relationship between mother and daughter, how the mother was still really keen to keep control over her daughter, but the daughter was really striving for a little bit more freedom and independence. That being said, though, the whodunit element of this book was really intriguing. I kept trying to figure out what had happened to Olivia and who had hurt her. And there were definitely twists and turns which kept me guessing throughout the whole book. Some were a little bit predictable, but overall I found the ending satisfying and worth the wait. I also enjoyed that this book was told from multiple perspectives. So you have after Olivia's fall, which is told from the perspective of Abby, and the weeks leading up to her fall, which is told from the perspective of Olivia. I really liked that. What I also quite enjoyed about this book is that in the state of Washington, which is where they lived, it was required by law that Olivia be kept on life support in order to give birth to the child. This was a really interesting ethical dilemma for me. I mean, you know, is that fair? What happens to that child? I mean, she has no mother, she has no father that they're aware of. I'm not going to go into that. And now Abby, who is the grandmother of this child, is expected to pay for the expenses of keeping this woman, of keeping her daughter alive and giving birth to this child when insurance doesn't want a bar of it. So it's an interesting question to think about, really. Is it morally acceptable to leave a girl, you know, hanging on like that, like not letting her die in order to give birth to a child? And is it fair to bring that child into the world where they're not necessarily going to have a family to love and care for them? I really like books that make me think about these sorts of things. So that's definitely another element that I really enjoyed about The Night Olivia Fell. Really, really good book. I would highly recommend. The next book that I read in September was 55 by James Delagny. So when I picked this up in a haul, probably a few months ago, I was really keen to read this. I was really excited for it. And I think quite a few of you guys were excited for me to read it as well. This is an Australian mystery thriller, and it's compared between, it says, When Wolf Creek Meets the Dry, in a superb new outback thriller. If you don't know me, I love The Dry. It's one of my favorite books of the year. I also loved Wolf Creek. Scary as hell. So yeah, really interesting. I gave this a 3 to 3.5 star. When I read this, I thought it was going to be a 5-star read, but unfortunately didn't quite pan out that way. So in a remote, sleepy Western Australian town, an injured man stumbles into Sergeant Chandler Jenkins' small police station. The man's name is Gabriel, and he claims that he's been drugged by a man and driven to a cabin in the middle of nowhere, tied up, and was going to be victim number 55. So this killer's 55th victim. So Gabriel claims that the man who did this to him was called Heath, and that the police launch a series of investigations to try and find this Heath. But while they are doing this, a man named Heath walks into the police station and claims that he has been kidnapped and tied up in a undisclosed location by a man named Gabriel. And yeah, so these two men are telling the exact same stories, and it becomes clear that one of them is a kidnapper and possibly a killer, and there is possibly 54 other victims out there. So the premise sounds really good, right? This idea that there's some sort of serial killer that's killed 55 victims or 54 victims that's out in the middle of the Australian desert that nobody's heard of. It's, you know, really intriguing. And when I read that this book was compared to Wolf Creek and The Dry, like, I knew I had to read it. I knew I had to. But really, there weren't a lot of similarities between either of those books for me. I mean, I suppose the similarities with The Dry would be like the environment, that they're both set in the desert, in the dry environment. However, Jane Harper does a much better job at creating that environment for me. It was still a part of 55 for sure, but just not as well done. And I suppose the idea that 55 is similar to Wolf Creek, I mean, I guess they both center around serial killers in outback Australia. But that's really the only link that I could make toward the two stories. I think what I liked about, I think I was expecting something very much more like The Dry, with a strange plot that was very character driven and really drawing on that landscape. But really, this was more of a police procedural sort of book, which is not what I had expected. Don't get me wrong, I really like police procedurals, but I don't think that did this book justice. It just meant that there wasn't anything particularly special about this book. Besides the premise, which had so much promise, there was nothing special. And I don't think any of the locations were special. I don't think any of the plot twists were special. I don't think any of the characters were special, which is a little bit of a disappointment for me. So I'll just quickly tell you what I liked and what I didn't like. I really liked the premise, as I said. I thought it was a really cool idea for a novel. I thought that there could be a potential serial killer that no one knew of. I think that's really cool. I really like the inclusion of religion in this book. I'm not going to go into too much detail about that, but I hadn't expected it, and it was a focus from the beginning throughout, and I'm not going to go into how it's a focus. And I really liked the two different suspects. I think they were really different, and it was really hard to try and figure out which one was telling the truth, and I did like that element. What I didn't like the two police officers drama between Mitch and Chandler, like their whole backstory. Didn't like it. It took up a big chunk of the story. Didn't like it at all. And I didn't like the superficial characters. Like, there were so many different characters mentioned in this book, and none of them were really explored in depth. And I think that was a disappointment. Overall, if you want to give it a go, I would, but I think there's some better books out there. If you want a sort of killer, mystery thriller set in the desert, go for The Dry by Jane Harper. The next one that I read this month, in September, was Tell Me a Secret by Samantha Hayes, which is this one here. And okay, so I've got Tell Me a Secret by Samantha Hayes. I would give this a 3.5 to a 4-star. And I said this was a psychological thriller with an unexpected twist. So this is a story about Lorna, and Lorna is a therapist, and she helps fragile people pull their lives back together, except Lorna is in bad need of a therapist herself. Last year, Lorna made the mistake of sleeping with one of her patients, and now that decision is coming back to haunt her. Okay, that's pretty much the premise of this book. So firstly, if you decide to buy this book, don't bother reading the blurb, because none of that happens until about page 200, and yeah, till after page 200. So don't even bother reading the blurb, because it's just going to spoil the book for you. Toward the beginning of the book, I felt like I was just waiting for the events on the blurb to happen. And this made me struggle to enjoy the story. Once I decided to just enjoy this book for being a book and ignore what was on the back, I really started to enjoy it a little bit more, and I started to get invested. So the book, as I said, starts off really slow. You're not told very much about any of the characters or the plot. This information is given to you in drips and drabs, and it's up for you, the reader, to try and put everything together and try and figure out what's going on. The middle section of this book was slow, and that was really focusing on the building of characterization, which is a big focus in this book, and on the relationship between Lorna and her mistress. I don't know what you call a male mistress. Anyway, her partner, her husband, her family, her friends. And the last 50 pages or so are full of twists and turns. I didn't really see any of them coming. It's worth a read if you like psychological thrillers that are really based around characterization. Have a go at it. Yeah, not a bad book. Next book that I read was Birthday Girl by Penelope Douglas, and this is a new adult romance, and this is something that I would not usually reach for, but it was so good, like so good. Go and get your hands on this book. I gave it 5 stars. Like, it was incredible. So it's about a girl named Jordan, and after her boyfriend gets arrested and they get thrown out of their house, they move in with her boyfriend's father, Pike. And Pike and Jordan have an instant attraction, but Jordan is dating Pike's son, so nothing can really happen. This was my first book by Penelope Douglas, and let me just say, wow, I need to get some more. I don't know why I haven't read any of her books before. This was just so good. It was forbidden, it was taboo, and I love this like love sensual story between Jordan, who's attracted to her boyfriend's father. So she is 19, he is 38, and it's just so off limits in so many ways. And this book is full of so much sexual chemistry. Like, the romance is so forbidden, and you just want it to happen, and you just can't, like, it just takes so long to get there, and you just want it to happen, but whew, it's very much a slow burn romance. So what I liked about this book was the relationship between Pike and Jordan. Like, it's just so intense. They fall hard and they fall fast. And I loved that it was written from both of their perspectives and how they both have their hesitations for different reasons. I loved Pike. Like, he is such an amazing man. Oh my God, is he not just the perfect male character? I don't know anyone who could read Birthday Girl and not form a serious crush on Pike. And I really like the softcore porn element of this book. Like some of the scenes in here are a little bit raunchy. What didn't I like? Nothing. I loved it. Go and get your hands on this. It was really, really good. Okay, next book that I read was Something in the Water by Catherine Steadman. So this is a Reese Witherspoon book club recommendation. I gave it 2.5 to 3 stars. Really wasn't my cup of tea. What this really reminded me was of the film Into the Blue with Jessica Alba and Paul Walker. If you haven't seen it, just go watch the trailer. It's essentially the same thing. I liked the movie better. And I just don't think that this was anything new or special. So it's about this couple that are on their dream honeymoon in Bora Bora. They're newlyweds, Erin and Mark, and they go scuba diving and they find something in the water, and they decide to keep what they find and they keep it a secret. But it soon becomes clear that somebody knows their secret, and the question is, can Erin and Mark depend on each other? So I was really torn about this book. Like, it's not bad per se. I just got bored. If you've ever seen that film Into the Blue, this is just what that's about. And the plot's just the same. I also found this book a little bit predictable and far-fetched. I suppose you would classify this as domestic thriller. I'm not sure. What I really quite liked the character of Erin. She did annoy me sometimes, but I liked how she followed her own mind and she did what she liked, and she trusted her gut feeling and she didn't let what Mark wanted influence her. I love the character of Eddie. So when you get into the book, like, he was one of my favorites. And I wish that this relationship between Eddie and Erin was more of a focus. And I think that Eddie was only in the novel because they needed it to make sense. I think he should have been more of a focus. And I really liked the relationship between Erin and Alexa. I wish that this had been explored more as well. What I didn't like, I hated the prologue. I think it ruined the story. It gave away the whole story and it made it predictable. I felt like if that wasn't included, the story would be completely different. I hated Mark. He annoyed me. He was just self-involved, egotistical, and entitled. Everything that happened before the wedding was boring, dragged, and the Holly sub-story was crap and wasn't well developed. Overall, was slightly disappointed with this as a pick. I only chose to read this because it was recommended by Reese Witherspoon and Hello Sunshine. I don't know that I would read it again. I probably wouldn't recommend it. Okay, the next book that I picked up that I read in September was In a Great Southern Land by Mary Ann O'Connor, and I gave this 4 to a 4.5 star. And if you don't remember, this is one of the first books that I posted on a haul in my channel. It's been on my shelf for a while and I've wanted to read it for ages. And it was a beautiful story that was unlike anything that I've read recently. So in A Great Southern Land, we have 2 central characters. We have an Irishman named Kieran Clancy, and he's gifted this land in Australia, and he leaves behind poverty-stricken Ireland with his whole family to make a life in Australia. Then we have Eve, and due to circumstances beyond her control, she finds herself as a convict sent to Australia on a life sentence. So I've not read a lot of Australian historical fiction. It's never really been an area of interest for me. However, I was really interested in this book, and I think it showcased many of the hardships that many new Australians faced when they came to Australia, and also showed a lot of the different reasons why people came, whether it was willingly or unwillingly. I think one of the elements that I really liked in this book was the clear definition of social hierarchy that had existed in Australia prior to, I would say, World War I, and how this had really been taken from England. And this is something that we've really moved away from in Australia now, but it's clear that it did exist, and that everything people were running away from back in the homeland from England, like this social hierarchy and entitlement, still existed here in Australia. I really enjoyed the different segments in this book. I enjoyed the story about the Eureka Stockade. I thought this is really interesting. Like, this is something I teach at school, but it's never something I've been personally interested in, but I liked reading about this from these characters' perspectives. I actually live pretty close to Ballarat, so like that was another element for me. Like, some of the places that I mentioned in this book, like, I've been to, and that's really cool. So what I really liked about this book is I love that it was told through a love story. I think that this just made it so much more accessible, and it made all of that factual information that was thrown at you more accessible and more enjoyable and a little bit more lighthearted. I loved how the author drew on her own heritage. So the Clancy family is actually based on her own family that immigrated from Ireland. And I liked how the author really focused on how Australia could become a land of opportunities and freedoms. I'm not going to go into what I didn't like because they are all spoilers, but for the most part, I love this book. And I think if you're looking for some great historical fiction, give it a go. Like, even if you're not Australian, I think you'll enjoy it. And I only have 2 more books left. One is a win and one is a miss. Okay, the second last book that I read in September was The Whisper Network by Chandler Baker, and I gave this 1 star. I hated it. I found it so incredibly boring. I almost DNF'd it so many times, but I already committed so much time into reading this that I just decided to see it through. I picked this up because it was Reese Witherspoon Hello Sunshine recommendation, and it was also Demek's Book of the Month. And I don't understand why, because it was so dull. So this book is about 4 women. Sloane, Artie, I hated her name, it just annoyed me. Grace and Rosalita, who work at a corporate company called TrueViv. The company's CEO dies unexpectedly, and the likely successor aims the complicated man, and the women believe that he shouldn't be CEO, so they take matters into their own hands. This is apparently a thriller, but it really isn't. Like, there's no thrilling aspect. There's no mystery. It's perhaps a contemporary novel with a slight mystery element. I don't know. There's nothing I liked. What I didn't like, so I hated the characters. They're all 2D. Nothing to like about them, and I hated the plot. It was cyclical and predictable. So do not read this book. It's really starting to make me doubt the Reese Witherspoon and Hello Sunshine recommendations, because there's been 2 that I've now really disliked in 1 month. So yeah. Okay. The last book that I read in September was The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. This is probably one of my favorite books of the month. I really enjoyed it. And I enjoyed it way more than I expected to. So on an annual New Year's Eve trip, for several friends, is surrounded by mystery when one of them is found dead. So they take a trip to the Scottish Highlands, and they're staying in this remote hotel, and one of them dies. I love the way this story was told. Like, there were 2 timelines going on in the days leading up to the discovery of this body and the days after the body is found. You do not hear from all of the characters in the story, which I think was great, because you're like, ooh, can I trust him? Like, oh. And it really leaves you guessing about, so you're not told until right at the very end who has died. And I love trying to figure out who died and who killed them, because you can't figure out motive unless you know who has actually died. And I think this was a great mystery element employed by the writer. As I said, I love that the author kept that identity of the dead person a secret. I had a lot of suspicions about who had died, and this changed throughout the book. And then I started figuring out what motives would have been for each person dying. And I loved how the author created these really frightening atmospheric, this feeling of isolation with the location. The wilderness and wild is almost a character in itself. Like, it's just so good. If you liked Sleep by, I think it's C.J. Taylor, I don't know. If you like Sleep, or you liked An Unwanted Guest by Shari Lapina, I think you'll love this. Like, just, yeah, I loved it. Anyway, that is the end of my September wrap up. I've been filming for 42 minutes now, so I really want to stop talking. I wanted to film 2 videos today, but I don't think I will. I'm exhausted. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books before, or if you're thinking about reading them now, and I'll catch you later. Bye!